Hello and welcome to Sips and Substance, where we distill politics down to its essence. This week, there's quite a lot of drama, but we're going to touch on that. We're going to talk more about presidential power as it relates to deportations, some of the ways that Trump is going to pay for the tax cuts that he's promising, as well as the 1974 Impoundment Control Act.
Okay, and people, I think people actually might be interested despite the name and not having, most people not have ever heard of it before. We were going to now throw things over to Justin. He had an assignment. I gave him an assignment to go find a beer from this LA brewery that was like Brewery of the Year or something at Great American Beer Festival. Since I didn't actually stumble across that booth while I was there with all the hundreds of people, but he didn't go. So fortunately, I have a beer in the fridge that we haven't had yet. The Copper Legend Oktoberfest beer from Jack's Abbey outside of Boston. Really solid brewery. I like a lot of their stuff. This is really good. They have imported hops and malts to be all in on the Oktoberfest theme. The beer, as you can see, is slightly kind of amber, so kind of roasted malts, which is a really nice flavor, kind of a little bit of caramely, a little resiny in the back end. Really solid fall beer. And it was a good time for me to finish it up because we're running out of fall.
In my defense, going to downtown Los Angeles would take about an hour, even though it's only like 5 miles away.
All right. So as Justin was saying, we're going to start out in the drama for the week. And the big drama is Matt Gaetz is out and Pam Bondi is in. And on the surface, right, this is pretty good news, right? Matt Gaetz is sort of the poster boy for what you would not want to see as Attorney General, right? From the Trump MAGA point of view, he was sort of sucking up a lot of oxygen, a lot of media attention on him. People were focusing on him. And, I don't think Trump necessarily liked that the attention was going away from him, but also it didn't look like he was going to get confirmed, right? Probably bad news for the Hegseths, Gabbards, and Kennedys of the world, who now people won't have to focus on, oh my God, we got to get rid of Gaetz. We can look at them, right? But it's to me, I mean, we're going to get into this in more detail, but going from Matt Gaetz to Pam Bondi, I'm sort of like, okay. From what we know about her, she's an election denier, right? She's pledged retribution. And to me, that's kind of what you need to know. She's basically, to me, the same policy outcome person as Matt Gaetz with different visuals, right? More qualified, but both of those candidates are candidates that seem like doesn't matter what they want what Trump wants. Right? What's your thought there, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I would say she's much more qualified, right? She was Attorney General for almost a decade in Florida.
On the surface, much more qualified.
Right. I'm not going to say she's like a brilliant legal mind or anything like that, but she's capable, right?
Sure.
I think when it comes to, basically the DOJ covers a lot of area. They are prosecuting drug lords, terrorists, tax fraud, Hunter Biden, you name it, right? And
the important things.
Yeah. I think that someone like Gaetz might be so destructive. He might just take this mandate of like, oh, retribution, and we're going to, drain the swamp and actually do some harm to terrorist prosecution of drug lords, child sex traffickers.
So, but why do you think that she wouldn't? I mean, they got to pick the clips from her on Fox News promising to investigate the investigators and prosecute the prosecutors. She seems all in on that. Do you think there's going to be different policy outcomes under her than there would be under Gaetz?
In that respect, no, right? I do think that there will be retribution. The people who investigated the Trump campaign during 2016, they will be investigated. The Lisa Pages of the world. It wouldn't surprise me if James Comey's investigated. Jack Smith will probably be investigated. Merrick Garland's going to be investigated. There will be a lot of investigations, right? But I do think that she's going to let the individual districts do their job when it comes to just prosecuting regular crime. It'll be more targeted, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that?
Because she has a lot of experience and she's done this in Florida, right? It just seems to me that it's almost like a Jeff Sessions versus a Bill Barr, right? everyone thought Jeff Sessions was a goofball and he wasn't particularly qualified to run the Justice Department, whereas Bill Barr, given that he had previous experience as AG, he was really able to implement quite a bit of Trump's desires. Fortunately for us, the election denier stuff, he basically said, hell no, this is all bullshit. Whereas Pam Bondi is not like that. And I do think, I don't want to defend election deniers. This is not my intent, but I do want to add a little bit of nuance here, right? Because I think there is a difference between someone like Pam Bondi and Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, and their sort of like way of thinking about things versus, say, the Rudy Giuliani's of the world and the Sidney Powells, right? The latter are just like so batshit insane, and they're not really dealing with facts. Whereas folks like Mike Johnson and Pam Bondi, even though they have fringe legal theories, they are at least using real facts to try and justify a particular outcome that they want.
What facts do they use to support election denying, though?
Right.
I don't see any of them.
So, for instance, in Pennsylvania, I might get the facts wrong here, so bear with me. But during COVID, the Supreme Court would say one thing, the Secretary of State would say one thing, and then say the county officials would have like a slightly different policy. So there could be actual debate about which ballots should be counted and which ones shouldn't be. We actually saw something similar happen with the Senate race with Bob Casey and David McCormick, where the Supreme Court said, hey, if the ballots don't meet the standard, you can't count them. And the county officials basically gave the Supreme Court the finger. It has not been resolved yet, but that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? Mm-hmm. I think that there's a difference there.
I take a different approach to that, and I think we've discussed this before. But to me, that when you're looking at the qualifications of these people, and we'll get into whether or not it even matters in a bit, but once you've reached a certain level of you're a clown, you're not a serious person, I think it actually does everyone a disservice to try to find rational parts of a person, right? If you think that the election, if that Trump won and Biden stole it, you're a clown. You are not a serious person, and you may stumble across some reasonable policies somewhere in your twisted mind. And I would imagine for most of these people, it's worse that they don't even really believe it. They just know they need to say it to stay on Trump's good side, which makes you a craven and a clown at the same time, which is just wonderful. But, once you're, hey, I'm an election denier, I think we're going to use the Department of Justice to get retribution on Donald Trump's enemies, right? There's nothing that you can say about yourself that's going to make me think, well, this pick should be taken seriously. The pick shouldn't be taken seriously, right? We should be of a mind that these people are absurd, and they're absurd on their face. There's nothing they can do that'll convince me that they're not. And it bothers me to read, like, in the media, in the Times and the Post and things like that, where people are like, well, they've got these policies that are ridiculous, but then these things they're stumble across that are pretty rational. It's like, you don't get to do that. If you are an absurd person, you shouldn't get to be in this position. And we shouldn't say, well, she's not as bad as she could be. Like, to me, it's like, I have a bar that's here. Once you've crossed it, I don't care if you're here or way over here, you're still beyond what we should consider, in my mind, for this. Now, obviously, throwing up your hands is like, well, they're nuts, right? That's not going to have any impact either. But I just don't think we should validate these picks by saying, well, despite their absurdities, they have some of these other policies that could be okay. I think
don't get me wrong. I would not vote to confirm her, right? For the very reason that you said. I think when you become an election denier, whether it's based on fringe legal theories or you're just batshit insane, I agree that it doesn't matter. That is a disqualifying attribute. I'm just saying that the reality is she's pretty likely to be confirmed.
Oh, yeah,
right?
I think she probably will be confirmed.
And if you had Pam Bondi's experience, but they made her more like Sidney Powell, I think she'd have a tougher time being confirmed. That's kind of what I'm getting at,
Probably.
right? And so I think like when try to add this nuance to the absurdity, you can at least make some predictions in
Yeah.
terms
Well, I
of
think
they'll be confirmed or they won't be confirmed. What are some of the questions that they're going to have to deal with? Like for instance, I can see I don't think Matt Gaetz, if he got to the actual confirmation hearings, I think he would have been destroyed by some of the Dem senators. Whereas I
possibly.
think Pam Bondi is probably going to be able to hold her own to some degree.
But if you think about it, though, it'll be like virtue signaling from the Democratic senators, and they would destroy
Sure.
Matt Gaetz and feel great about it.
Yeah.
But if you're right, and I think you are, that she's far more qualified and capable, she's probably going to be a worse attorney general for the country than Matt Gaetz would be. Matt Gaetz has the attention span of basically Donald Trump. He zips around for whatever he
Right.
thinks is popular and wants to be on TV and an influencer and all this stuff. He doesn't really care, right? Whereas she might be determined enough and competent enough as an administrator to get more of this crap done. So whereas Matt Gaetz is just a horrible image pick, right? You see him and like, this
Right.
guy should not be attorney general. She might actually be able to do more damage because both of them are going to do whatever Trump wants, and she might be more capable of getting it done.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the retribution stuff, she will be more damaging, right? Because she's more competent. But I think on the other side, from my perspective, there will be certain types of prosecutions that will just be like standard operating procedure.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
So you don't think you think she won't try to put her thumb on the everyday business of the Justice Department?
No, I think she has a mission and she's going to accomplish it. And the stuff that Trump isn't particularly interested in, Trump might have like a mandate that says something along the lines of, "Oh, we really need to go after these drug cartels," right? So she'll execute on that, but that's a good thing. Whereas Gaetz, if Trump said that, he would be incapable of doing that.
Well, I mean, I think to some extent you're probably right if you're just looking at the person in charge, right? But so from both sides, Trump has a limited attention span as well, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't care about a lot of the actual finer points of governing. And the person in charge, if it's Gaetz, he wouldn't care so much either. But I think it was probably a really good place to transition into the how much do the appointments really matter overall, right? Because we've talked about that. Trump has, we talked about it last week, it's sort of the intellectual MAGA, for lack of a better word. I think we settled on ideological MAGA because intellectual MAGA kind of makes you throw up in your mouth a little bit. But we'll talk about the ideological MAGA. He's got people like Stephen Miller, and then there's three other guys whose names I don't want to spend the time and effort to memorize, who are there to be policy people, deputy chief of staff for some sort of policy level stuff. And they are true believers. Right? Mm-hmm. They're very closely associated with Project 2025 and all this. And in terms of leaving the bureaucracy alone, they're pretty much all in on the idea of we need to get this executive order back in and fire a lot of these career bureaucrats and replace them with Trump loyalists. So if that really goes through and they get rid of all the fairly, one step down senior bureaucrats and replace them with political people, then anything we're thinking about is like, well, Trump isn't paying attention. Well, these political people that he's putting into these spots, and really that somebody like Jason Miller and these other folks will be putting into these spots, are going to do a lot of damage regardless of who's in charge.
Yeah. One thing I'm not convinced of, though, is do they have the talent to do that? For instance, do they care,
though? Do they want talent or they just want political hacks?
If you want to accomplish something, you need someone who knows how to navigate, right?
I mean, it's going to be a weird situation because you're right. Yeah. You're going to get rid of the people that are basically the line managers, right? If you replace them with political people, more or less, you'll get people who yell and scream, right?
Yeah.
They will tell everybody what to do. And I'm guessing they won't be sprinting to get it done, right? The way the bureaucracy tends to work is people don't want to do stuff that they don't want to do. And there are a lot of ways to not do things that you don't want to do. So there will be pushback, right? But it won't be because Trump's not paying attention. It'll just be because they don't play nice with others, I think is where it's going to come down to.
Yeah. And going back to, the deputy level in the White House, I do think that there will be some areas of the government that there's just no interest from the ideological MAGA, right? I don't care to enumerate all of them, but I think when you have someone like Doug Burgum running the Interior Department, that's someone who would expect in, say, a Romney administration. Mm. And you did mention that, hey, there might be something that catches Trump's eye, like, oh, maybe these permits on federal lands aren't going through quick enough, and Burgum's gonna have to answer for that. But I think for the most part, it'll just be not even an afterthought. Trump nor his White House staff are going to really care, and they're just going to.
You're probably right that it won't be until it is, right? If Steve Bannon wakes up someday and says, you know what, the Department of the Interior isn't doing what it ought to do, and so we need to get Doug Burgum to light a fire under him and get him moving, and then all of a sudden Trump will be like, hey, what's going on with Doug? And then it's just something random like that.
It's possible. I don't think
anything is immune. I mean, who would have thought before he took over that a matter as simple as the census would have caused all the ridiculousness that they wanted to go through? I mean, we've been counting forever since the dawn of the country, and then all of a sudden we need to change this so the numbers are better for us politically. It's like, this is new. Wasn't expecting that. I think we can't. Again, you can't make a living and a life out of anticipating everything ridiculous at every moment, but I'm not going to be surprised when ridiculous things come up and places that you thought would have been free from Trump influence are now all of a sudden the next hurricane map with a little Sharpie thing on it because somebody told him he was wrong. He's got to change the weather prediction.
Right? Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think anyone in 2017 would say like, oh yeah, NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Agency,
right down the street from me, by the way.
Whatever it is, they probably thought they were just going to be fine until Sharpie Gate.
We predict the weather. What is it? It's the weather. It's
right.
Like, no, you don't. The president predicts the weather, and if you disagree, so I mean, I think you're right. There are going to be a lot of things that he doesn't focus on, but I think when we're talking about, certainly the important positions, right? Yeah. They're signing up for a job that's all about catering to Trump. You talk about Doug Burgum, right? And I think you can talk about Marco Rubio in the same way. They're both traditional Republican picks.
Right.
And there was a time when both of them were very opposed to Trump.
Yeah.
Right? They've understood that for their political futures, they now have to kiss the ring and bend over and kiss other parts, right? Yeah. Just like everybody else. And that's what their job is going to entail.
Yeah, Marco Rubio.
No pushback, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, he's in a really precarious situation because on one hand, he is kind of like your standard pick, even though he's kind of gone off the rails over the past couple of years. But Trump is very interested in the State Department. He's very interested in Treasury. He's very interested in defense and the intel community, as well as justice, mainly for retribution purposes. So he's in a real tough spot. And I don't know, maybe he can learn from Pompeo because Pompeo survived until after January 6th. But
I think
it'll be tough.
I think there'll be shorter grace periods this time. I think if Trump has shown anything, he's more volatile and less patient. And he complains all the time about how all these people that people told him to use last time worked against him. So if he sees any signs that you're working against him, I think you're going to be out the door, lickety split, right? Yeah. There's not going to be any, I don't think, so to me, you could, aside from the sort of the image, Jim Jordan would be pretty much the same Secretary of State as Marco Rubio to me, right? Both of them have to do everything Trump wants to keep that position. There's no room for independent thought and policy at the State Department in this Trump administration, in my mind.
Yeah, I think for the things that Trump is interested in, that is correct. But I would trust Rubio over, say, Jordan when it comes to the things that Trump isn't interested in, right? Just to give an example, there might be some, deal to be made with Kazakhstan. I'm just making something up. Jordan wouldn't even have the mind to comprehend that Whereas Rubio, he would be like, oh yeah, I'm very familiar with this, and we'll get this done. Trump doesn't care, but we're going to do what's best for the country.
Mhm.
I think we should distinguish those.
I think there's the possibility of that, but at any time, anything weird, Trump could be like, hey, all of a sudden I care, right? We could have Sharpie Gate over Kazakhstan for all we know.
Yeah.
Right? I think, to me, when it comes down to it, since the number one characteristic to be hired for any of these positions now is absolute fealty to Trump,
right?
I think that you're just splitting hairs when you say this person is better than that person. It's like, are the policy outcomes going to be any different? Maybe marginally, but probably not on anything people really care about.
Yeah. So, to circle back to the beginning of this conversation where we believe that, Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and RFK will get more scrutiny, it seems to me that Hegseth is sexual assault allegation. He's in trouble. Tulsi, I think, is also in trouble as well. The Senate is demanding her FBI file. Who knows what's in it, right? Just because you say pro-Putin stuff doesn't mean you're necessarily a willing asset for Russia.
At best, she's one of the useful idiots.
Right, exactly.
A few weeks ago.
I did say last week that we should at least allow her to have a confirmation hearing. I still wouldn't vote for her, but I would at least like to see what she has to say and to answer questions. Whereas, someone like Hegseth, I frankly don't care. He's so unqualified that it would just waste everyone's time.
Well, I put Tulsi Gabbard in the same clown car. I mean,
it's fair.
The one I really do hope, I really hope gets rejected is Kennedy. I mean, he's such a fraud and a danger, an actual danger. I mean, we mentioned, I think, briefly last time about the Samoa thing. We didn't
right.
I looked into it. I couldn't remember the specifics, but it's something like 80 kids died of measles after he told people not to take measles vaccinations.
Right.
And I think that's not particularly much, but there are 200,000 people living in Samoa. Right. That's a pretty large amount of childhood death just from some imbecile running his mouth. And giving this imbecile a platform to be able to tell people that are already buying into, hey, maybe we shouldn't immunize our kids, is just, that to me is one where it does matter who you pick, because he's actually more dangerous than Trump, which is hard to even imagine.
Right. Yeah, I do find that interesting, though, like how many people on the left are opposed to Kennedy, because I think if you turn the clocks back 20 years ago, that wouldn't be the case.
Well, sure.
A lot of these cranks were
before
far left, right?
Jared Polis, by the way, comes from, he's very representative of a lot of the anti-vaxxers that were in Boulder before COVID. And then people started to realize, oh, wait a minute, there's actually a bunch of real lunatics now that are becoming anti-vaxxers. So you have, I'm guessing that the goofballs parents who go to the Waldorf Academy are still anti-vax, and there's still plenty of them. Yeah. And this guy, the other big set was in LA, like the really rich women in LA. There was a lot of new age anti-vaxxing going on there.
Yeah, you see that in the Bay Area as well.
Yeah, and now it's kind of switched sides completely. Now you have the idiot Trumpists that are like, well, they tell us not to, so we won't. Okay.
Yeah, it's very strange, but hey, we're in a realignment period. The last thing I want to talk about is the threats from Elon Musk, as well as the future White House staff. They basically said, hey, any senator who records a no vote, they're going to be primaried. And Elon Musk is going to be our vehicle to do that. And, Matt Gaetz has already said that there are 4 senators who, were confirmed no's. There's probably a lot more in private, but he named these people specifically. So the first 2 you'd expect, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and then Mitch McConnell was the other one. So new Democratic ally, Mitch McConnell.
So I think it would be actually very good news for Democrats if they did primary these sorts of people. If you put a MAGA nutcase in Maine, right, they're not winning.
Right.
They're probably not going to win in Alaska, right?
Yeah, Alaska is interesting like that.
They become a lot more moderate than they used to be.
Yeah, at least on one axis.
And Kentucky has demonstrated that they will vote for a Democrat over a MAGA nut job for governor.
Yeah, but I do think that
They
replacing.
probably it's the least likely,
Yeah,
but
but
it's
McConnell has nothing to
possible.
lose. He's done after this. He's retiring.
Yeah, that's true.
Collins could also retire. I mean, to me, this seems like an empty threat. The last person
It does.
was Mitt Romney's replacement, Senator Curtis from Utah.
Mm.
Utah is kind of interesting because the Mormon population there is less Trump friendly than
Yes.
other
And they're
religious
completely dominant.
organizations.
So whatever
Right.
the Mormon population decides to do, that's what's going to happen.
Right.
So I don't see that guy losing any sleep.
Yeah, and plus he just got
And he
elected.
just
Right.
got elected.
Yeah.
So
So 6 years is a long time.
Barring catastrophe, there won't be Trump around when he's running again.
Yeah. Now, someone else, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, he's been kind of playing this game where he's advocating for regular order in the Senate, things like that. He is up for re-election in 2 years, and that is a seat the Democrats really want. So
I'm
again,
not going to bite on that. They're not winning in North Carolina.
nope. I do think that the Democrats, if a lot of the bad things that are being predicted in
if
the
Trump
Trump administration,
unleashes everything that he says he's going to do,
yeah,
the country is going to suffer. Hopefully, then people will be like, "Hold on, this guy is an idiot," and maybe we'll get some sort of reaction. But barring that, I'm not going to hold my breath.
So I don't know. To me, I think these are empty threats.
I don't think they're as useful as threats of primarying Congress members of the Congress.
The House, the House. I think that would be a serious threat, right? But
You have
senators just have so much more name recognition.
Yeah. And you have to be generally a little bit more mainstream as a senator than you do to win a House district, especially a solid red House district. You have to be a bomb throwing lunatic.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to be Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert. Those people win House districts. They do not generally win Senate seats. So I think these senators know that too. I mean, you can't. Yeah. And there's a reason that a lot of these people ran behind Trump, because a lot of the Trumpists come out and they vote for Trump. They didn't even bother voting for Senate. What was it in Wisconsin? Something like 75,000 people just voted.
There's been a surprising amount of people who just voted Trump and nothing else. And this is why, to go off on like a small tangent here, once Trump is gone, what is the Republican Party going to look like? What is the Democratic Party going to look like? Right? Because right now, I think a lot of the reforms are with Trump in mind. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, you should be thinking about how to address your issues for a non-Trump candidate in the future, right?
Well, in general, I think part of the problem that the Democrats have is that they're trying to run against Trump,
right,
rather than run for what they're for.
Right, and so that obviously is going to have to change for 2028.
It should have changed for this past election, but it didn't, and here we are.
Oh, it's tempting.
Here we are, right? Because it didn't change. But yeah, I think you're right that the Democrats, and we'll definitely be getting into this, like what should the Democrats do, right? Because we're still digesting it ourselves. Data's still coming out. I'm starting to get a picture of what I think I would do if I was the Democratic Party. I imagine you are as well. We'll have to talk about that in an upcoming episode, because there's a lot
2025.
Boom, there you go. New Year's resolutions.
Okay, so on to our next topic. I want to revisit the topic of deportation. So in our previous episode, when we discussed the immigration policy, we made a prediction that they are very serious about accomplishing this, and they also have the power to do so. It is my opinion that the aspect of Trump having a mandate to do whatever he wants, I think that is truly misguided. He won the popular vote, and there is a trifecta. Yes, that is true. But by and large, most people do not follow, sort of this MAGA ideology. But where I do think that there is a mandate, it's with deportations and border security. Now, what does that mean, right? Does that mean that Trump has a mandate to round up every undocumented immigrant in this country? No, I don't think he has a mandate to do that. But I do think he has a pretty strong mandate to deport the violent criminals, to get a hold on all the asylum claims, which, I think we can all agree that most of them are bogus. when it comes to adhering to what asylum is meant to be for. And I think that, deporting grandma or the dreamers, that's probably off the table in terms of support. Now, that doesn't mean that Trump won't try to do something along those lines, right?
Yeah, that was going to be my question is like, how important do you think it is if he has a mandate or believes he has a mandate?
So I think, this is where the politics gets interesting, right? Because I think a good first step, to talk about boiling the frog in the water, right? So you're not going to just have this like program where you put everyone into a camp and then send them away, right? There's going to be some real challenges that you face. There's going to be legal action. There's going to be a political response through like mass protest. So the first step is that they're going to find all the people who should be deported. They're in our prisons, and they're just going to get rid of them. And if I'm, some sort of like immigration advocate, I don't really fight that because I think there's broad support for that. And we linked an article in the show notes that talks about, the varying levels of support for mass deportation. It really depends on how you ask it. But the concept at a, nebulous level for mass deportation, it's popular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, so the reason that I thought that I wanted to talk about this week is that this week Trump confirmed and through his social media that yes, he's definitely wants to use the military to do this. He's serious about getting it done. So I think that's why we need to think about it a little bit more in terms of what's going to happen, right? So he said he wants to use the military, and how is he going to do that? Can he actually do that? And there are, unfortunately, a number of ways where he could do that. We could see the military patrolling the streets and looking for immigrants and wanting to get rid of them. I'm hoping that you're right. We won't get that far right away, but he could use the Insurrection Act, right? Usually you can't use American military on domestic soil, right, to do things unless you invoke something like the Insurrection Act. You can call for, you can say that there's enough problems that the Insurrection Act is warranted and send troops in the streets to take care of it and to patrol the border. If you don't want to do that, you can declare a state of emergency, and then that gives you certain powers as well, right? You don't even have to use federal troops. You can use state National Guard troops and ask the governors to do things. And certainly in many of the border states, the governors will be more than happy, right, to pitch in. And other governors from states like Alabama and Florida are happy to send their troops. They're already doing it, sending National Guard troops to the border, right? It's not a stretch to think that the military is going to get involved. And it's not like a matter of, setting up observation posts and training guns on the border. It'd probably be more of a matter of a lot of logistical support. You could have some security, some border security. They could add to that too, certainly, and help and shut down the border if that's what Trump wants to do. But in terms of deportation, seems like there's a lot of thought around getting the military to build these detention centers that you need, right? Where to put people before you deport them. So it seems like it's serious that the military will get involved. There are ways to push back. Congress can decide that the state of emergency isn't real, but with Republican Congress in both houses, that's not going to happen, right? You can go to court, but with the courts, especially the Supreme Court, they're going to probably continue to be very deferential to Trump. So it seems like what he wants to do is going to happen. And if he wants to use the military to do a lot of these things, he's going to be able to do that. Right? I do think it's very useful to think about it in terms, as you said, like, what are the approaches, right? Are we going to see the criminals and be good? I've seen a number of Republicans on various interview shows all across the network saying, oh, we're not going to go after all of them. We can't do that. Right? We're just going to start. We're going to go after the criminals. If that's the case, like you said, it's not a lot of people that are going to object and want to spend their political capital on, the prisoners who have committed crimes that are in our prisons, we should keep them here. We need them in our country. That seems like, as you're saying, kind of something everyone's going to get behind. But when they start going beyond that, right? Who knows what's, where that would end, right? If they start with targeted raids of places where they think there's a lot of illegal immigrants, or when they if they went beyond that to general roundups, these things would get very ugly very fast. And the support that I think that you're talking about is going to kind of wrap up and turn against them. I don't know how much that's going to matter before there's a midterm election, but it's something we're going to see, right?
Right. And frankly, there is more support than you would think for deporting absolutely everyone, right?
Sure.
I think it's like roughly like 40% of the population. So it's not like, something so unpopular that only 10% is going to support it. It's almost half the country. So,
right.
So we have to also keep that in mind.
Well, I think it's important to know that that's sort of in the abstract without sort of what it would mean to the country.
Right.
And that's why I want to get into that in a minute. And like, what would actually happen if we did this? If we got rid of everybody, what would it mean for us? And I think I'm pretty confident that those people haven't gamed through the scenario to see what's going to happen if we did deport everybody. But I think another thing that we are very likely to see is I think Trump is going to go after sanctuary cities from the start, right? If you don't cooperate, we're going to take away your money. And that's something that maybe he can do, maybe he can't do with executive orders. But if you have legislation for that, you can certainly do that. And I could very easily see it coming down to a case where the Democrats would either have to go along or filibuster and shut down the government over defending sanctuary cities. And that would put Democrats in a real political bind. Whichever way they went on that, it would not be good for them politically. Right. So it's the sanctuary city issue is going to be a big issue. I could see that being the main focus. Like, we're getting rid of criminals, we're going to go after sanctuary cities, because both of those would be visible. It wouldn't have too much impact on wider society. And you'd be able to say, look what I'm doing. Look at the Democrats resisting.
Yeah. And you're going to talk about the economic impact in a second here. But I do think it would be interesting if you had some sort of like targeted deportation of undocumented immigrants who are just here for work, right? One of the arguments is that, hey, they've taken our jobs. Now, I think
we will talk about that in a minute, how that's not really the case.
Right. But I think there are certain industries where that's a easier sell, right? Like no one wants to be in, the hot California sun in the summer, picking strawberries, right? I would hope that those people are safe because we all benefit from that. But there are some,
hope, I guess.
Right. No, but I mean, I'm trying to be realistic
safer in California than say in Alabama. I will say that.
Right. But if you have, say, an undocumented immigrant who's working as an auto mechanic, I could see that kind of person being deported, right? Because you can make the argument saying, hey, this is a job that Americans want. And
do you think we'd have the ability to be that fine in our discrimination between because there's not like these massive farms where there's all these undocumented auto workers.
Right.
You'd be going to go shop to shop to shop.
Right. I was just using this as an example, right? Like to distinguish between various professions.
Right. And I think if there were going to be more targeted raids like that, it would be in the construction industry.
Right. That's also a great example. I should have used that.
There needs to be more people in one place, and you could get a bunch of them at once, I guess, if you're trying to be efficient in your removals. But I think the other thing to think about when you think about, well, what's the scope going to be, right? It's useful to think about the logistics. We don't have unoccupied camps sitting out there waiting for illegal immigrants to go through, to be sent to. We don't have unoccupied immigration officials and immigration judges just waiting there to process these cases. One of the reasons that these asylum cases go on so long is we don't have anywhere near enough immigration officials. Right? We don't have planes sitting around waiting to fly people back to the countries they came from. We don't necessarily have agreements with all the countries that they will take back people we wanted to.
That's an important one right there.
Very important, right? We can do all this stuff, put them on a plane. If we don't get permission to land, it's not going to happen, right? So there are a lot of natural breaks to slow this process down, right? It's not going to happen like instantly. We're going to deport everybody. We could start by deporting people in prisons. We could expand that with sanctuary cities. We could start to do some targeted other stuff. But every time we increase this, there's not necessarily, there aren't the logistics in place to do it quickly. So that's the one thing that argues in favor of this not happening, at least as extremely as Trump has promised is going to happen. He's not
Right.
getting rid of everybody overnight.
Right. It's incredibly difficult to do that. But I do think that, you know, we saw how Republican governors gamed the media by taking undocumented immigrants and basically sending them to, places like Chicago, New York City, stuff like that. It becomes a media spectacle, and you
I think
start.
it was actually effective though, because the amount of
It
money
was.
it ended up
That's my point.
costing New York and Chicago and Denver,
Right.
it cost these cities a lot of
Right.
money to take. And people who are normally like, yes, let everybody come in, they're like, wait a minute, this is costing us a lot of money now. It's not
Right.
just the Texans that have to deal with this.
And you can see this in the voter data as well, right?
Yep.
You look at precincts in, say, New York City. These working class people, they're looking at the situation saying, why are those people getting treated better than me?
Yep.
I'm an American, right?
There was I think it was New York. It was some sort of urban data that was in, I think, the Times today that said, I think it was New York, that Trump was up like 80,000 votes and compared to 2020, and Harris was down something like 200 to 250,000 votes compared to Biden in 2020. Right. In what's supposed to be and needs to be a Democratic stronghold if you want to win.
Right.
And yeah, I think you're right that this issue is like,
right.
What's going on here?
And so going back to that, I think if you start doing these like targeted raids on, say, like in the meat packing industry or a major construction site, I think if you make a media spectacle out of that, that's going to have a chilling effect. And I think they're hoping that a lot of people self-deport in that regard, right? They say, well, I don't want to be caught, and so I'm just going to leave on my own terms right now.
And that's what we actually have seen in the past. Like people talk about some of the Eisenhower policy, the very hideously named Operation Wetback. Apparently, doing some reading about this, it's more people self-deported than anything else because it became very widely known that this was going on. But when you talk about sort of things like these targeted raids, you talk about self-deportation, you talk about getting rid of a lot of immigrants, right? I think, as I said a minute ago, most people haven't really worked this through, what really happened. And if we actually did get rid of all the immigrants, it would be a huge blow to the economy, right? If you take, it's like 11, 12,000 or 12 million is kind of the estimate for how many illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants we have in the country right now. You knock that off of the consumption, consumer consumption in this country, that would be a huge blow to the economy right there. And companies wouldn't be able to sell as many goods. They would have to lay off other workers because they're making too much for a population that's suddenly down 11 or 12 million people. At the same time, other firms wouldn't be able to meet their production needs. I think the best example of this is in the food industry, right? I was watching, CNN actually had some interesting numbers the other day. I happened to be watching at lunch, so that one worked for me. This is data from the Center for American Progress that CNN put on their screen. But they're estimating that there's 1.7 million undocumented immigrants in the food supply chain. About 300,000 of them in farming, about 200,000 in food production, 75,000 in wholesale, 150,000 in grocery stores, 800-some thousand in restaurants, and another 100,000 in various other things. You get rid of all that, we could probably make do and get by with our food system, but prices are going to go through the roof. And if you won the election based on, hey, inflation's out of control, the Democrats don't know what to do, I'm going to control it. If you drastically increase the prices of food, people are going to pay attention, right? That is going to be a big deal, right? And then like if you look a little bit closer at like farm workers, data from the USDA, again from CNN, only 36% of farm workers are U.S. citizens. 23% are authorized immigrants, and then 41% are undocumented immigrants, right? You knock out 40% of anybody's work supply.
Oh boy,
things are going to just go crazy, right? And as you said, there are some jobs that Americans will, hey, I'll take this job. Right. Picking fruit and vegetables in the fields are not those jobs.
Right.
right? There's a really good example in 2011. Alabama really cracked down on illegal immigrants and farm labor and things like that. And all of a sudden, they couldn't get anyone to pick the crops. The immigrants left, and Americans did not come pick the crops. They couldn't pay enough. And even if you could pay enough, the prices of food would go through the roof. So basically, stuff's just rotting in the fields because no one's there to pick it, right? If we really do get, I don't think we will, but if we really did get rid of 11 or 12 million people, the economy would just crater.
Right. Yeah. And this is why I think that, Trump is probably going to do something along the lines of, going after the criminals. He's going to really crack down the asylum people. And then he's just going to say, I built the wall, the border's secure. We did all the deportations we need to do, right?
I think you're right with one other exception. I really think he's going to make a big splash about going after the sanctuary cities. Because I think that's another thing that would be really visible and really show that he's taking on the woke elites, and really give the woke elites a big chance to step in it. And they generally take that up. It'll be really good for him politically to do that. Right. I think it's going to help him a lot. And so I think you're right. There's going to be, let's get rid of the criminals, right? Let's crack down on this phony asylum where everybody who comes here looking to make money pretends that they're being abused, right? And it's not to say, right, there are plenty of legitimate asylum claims, but they get lost in the illegitimate claims, right? But then if you can add in there that you take on the sanctuary cities, then you've done enough to attract enough attention from your base, and you haven't done enough to ruin the economy for everybody else. That would be, if I was going to take on this policy, which I would not want to do, but if I was going to, from the Trump perspective, that's what I would do. I think that's the most likely. Now, is he liable to get distracted and do something ridiculous? Sure. We have no idea what's gonna to strike his fancy, but if if they're sort of the ideological MAGAs are advising him, I would guess that that's what they're suggesting.
Right. And there's also talk about going after birthright citizenship. And
I can't imagine that would happen. That would take a constitutional amendment.
Well, would it with the Supreme Court?
Well, you never know with our Supreme Court. I'm sure.
I do think that the Supreme Court would rule in favor of birthright citizenship being a thing, but there is a risk, right? We have made incorrect predictions about the Supreme Court.
That's true, and the Supreme Court has made incorrect decisions throughout our history. Plessy versus Ferguson, or Dred Scott, and with any of those. So there's plenty of chance for them to be wrong.
We will definitely talk about that when we're going to have a SCOTUS segment sometime in the future, but that'll definitely be one of the things that we talk about. But, they can also not give social security numbers to these kids, right, who are born here. There are various levers. If you get someone who is nefarious into the Social Security Administration, those sort of things can happen.
I got to think you wouldn't be able to, if they rule that that people are everyone's a citizen. I think
no. Of course, yeah, I'm saying that that is a possibility that they could start doing it. There would be some sort of injunction, but at that point the damage is done, right? You've already sent that chilling effect that, hey, if you have a child born here, you're not going to get a Social Security card, and there's not going to be any sort of documentation that they're a U.S. citizen, or there might be some remedy in the future, but you know how remedies are. They're difficult to do. I mean, how many times have we been part of a class action lawsuit? We get that little thing in the mail that says, hey, you're entitled to $5, and we just don't send it in, right? Now imagine that times 100. Yeah. So, the chilling effect, I think, is, understated for a lot of these policies.
Yep. And I think what's interesting too is I still see, people are doing interviews with immigrants and undocumented immigrants, and they say, yeah, I would have voted for Trump. I think he's got the right idea because he's not talking about me. He's talking about the people that are coming here to take advantage. I'm here to work.
Right.
And they just don't get it. I think people are going to be in for a rude awakening that it's not going to be a friendly time, even if he doesn't deport you. Right. And I don't think he's going to be able to deport everyone or even try. It's not going to be a great time to be an undocumented immigrant in this country.
Right.
You're going to be looking over your shoulder a lot more than you used to.
All right, the last thing we want to talk about is Trump's plan for tax cuts, as well as the 1974 Impoundment Control Act. So, Trump has promised that we're going to get awesome tax cuts, but he also says Social Security, Medicare, and defense cuts are off the table. So, given that all these programs that take up a huge portion of the budget are off the table, Medicaid is likely in his crosshairs.
Now, we do need to give the caveat that he does, and we're going to get into this more later when more details come out, but he's promising to pay for everything with his tariffs. Now, I'm a little unconvinced, but that's why we're talking about the other possible mechanisms right now.
Right.
We're not forgetting the tariff promise, but we'll get to that when we'll see more. Yeah, who could? It's just astounding stuff. But anyway, yeah, like you're saying, Medicaid seems to be at issue, right? And the whole thing about the Impoundment Act is that, you know, it's to prevent from the president for not spending what Congress tells them to, right? You're not allowed to keep money. And the Supreme Court has said you can't do that. You can't. You have to pay attention to this. But he's betting that if he goes awry of this act, that the court might not rule against him this time, right? And I'm not sure that that's a bad bet on his behalf.
Right. And so basically, every president prior to Nixon, they might withhold funds for a particular agency, or they would intentionally slow walk it. Trump was actually, one of the reasons Trump got impeached was because he slow walked money appropriated to the Ukrainians. Right. That was part of the first impeachment trial. So, you know, the president since Nixon has not had the power to withhold funds, and the power of the purse is strictly within Congress. And there hasn't been much debate since then. Now, Trump really, really wants to go after that. And obviously with this Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they really think that this is a huge hindrance to them, because they want to make massive, massive cuts to the point where we shouldn't even pay attention to it because it's completely unrealistic.
Although they have Marjorie Taylor Greene now is going to be their congressional counterpart. So I'm sure they're going to get some great things done.
Oh, yes. So the way to get around this, you know, as you mentioned, you'll be able to challenge it in court and see what happens. I'm very skeptical that the Supreme Court would say that the president has this power. Now, what could be interesting is you won't be able to overturn the law in its entirety through budget reconciliation, right? But you may be able to neuter the law enough to the point where you only need 50 votes plus one. You know, I'm assuming JD Vance is the plus one to, you know, allow Trump to make cuts in this way. So we'll have to see what the Senate parliamentarian says about that. You know, I also have my doubts about that, but I just want to give our listeners sort of a preview of what the upcoming fights will be.
Yeah, I think it's something important to remember with this. Like, if Trump goes ahead and cuts and withholds some money, right? And suppose like it's sanctuary cities, says I'm not giving them the money that the Congress says they can have because they're sanctuary cities, right? Even if they do sue successfully, it'd take years to get that money back. So just withholding the money and going through the legal process to try to get it back, there's going to be damage done by withholding these funds. So even if the court says you can't do that, it would take them a while to say you can't do that.
Right. And you could even do everything by the book, and you can use something called weaponized incompetence, right? So you replace certain bureaucrats with people who really have no idea what they're doing, or maybe they do and they pretend that they don't. And you could slow walk things that way. So you could do everything by the book, but the outcome would effectively be the same. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, on the other hand, Trump might not even have to go around the Impoundment Control Act, right? He could probably just have enough votes in both the House and the Senate to just cut Medicaid spending in its entirety, right? Not all of Medicaid spending, of course, but make substantial cuts. One of the things that Trump wants to do is sort of ruin Obama's legacy. So the ACA, or Obamacare, there was Medicaid expansion. And there was a deal with the states would get some sort of funding from the federal government if they implemented Medicaid expansion. The CMS, so Dr. Oz, got appointed to be the CMS administrator.
Administrator of Medicare and Medicaid, to cut through the acronym.
Yes. And, he's not particularly qualified. Yes, he's a medical professional, but typically you want someone who has a lot of hospital administrative experience, people who deal with insurance companies, things like that. And so the way I read this is he's going to be a yes man. He's going to do whatever Trump wants. And if Trump says, hey, I want you to cripple the exchanges, I want you to really make it a nightmare for Medicaid payments to be reimbursed, well, he'll have that power and it'll be really difficult to do anything about it.
Well, yeah, again, it shouldn't surprise us that another choice, their primary qualification in Trump's mind is that they'll do whatever he wants them to do. Right. So, yeah, I think this is the kind of thing where we'll start to see what goes on in the Senate. I think we'll have some interesting conversations about whether or not they should get rid of the filibuster. Trump will be screaming for it. Whether the holdouts will be able to hold out long enough is another story. I know you think they won't. I'm not that confident. I think
the fact that there's 53 seats held by the Republicans
getting those. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, I think finding 4 votes to preserve Medicaid as it is right now, that might be a tough sell.
Yeah, but I mean, they could go after something that's more popular among the Republican base for getting rid of the filibuster. And then, hey, we've gotten rid of the filibuster. Now we can gut Medicaid, right? They could do it on something about immigration if they wanted to.
Sure.
Or something about inflation or something that really is going to be hard for the Republicans to resist. And there are some institutionalists, but I think they're fewer and far between than there were before Trump came along.
Yeah, I mean, John McCain's no longer with us. Mitt Romney's gone. Yeah,
Lindsey Graham is now the ghost of Lindsey Graham.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, but I mean, I do think that it shouldn't surprise people that Medicaid gets cut. Is kind of what I'm getting at here, right? Yeah. They probably had the votes to do it. Definitely in the Senate, I think. The House, I actually think that's where you might have a little bit more flexibility is not the right word, but you have a higher chance of a bill dying in the House that cuts Medicaid just because the House majority is so slim. Yeah, and there's so many people who won by single digits.
The irony of all of that is that the red states get far more in government payments than the blue states for things like this. I guess it will help people tax bills in blue states, I suppose, but it can do some real damage if we're taking the poorest people in our country off of the medical insurance rules.
Right. And the thing is, we will have to pay for them in one way or another, right? By law, they are entitled to emergency care. And so, if they have a chronic condition that develops into something awful and you multiply that by what? I don't know how many people are on Medicaid, tens of millions, I think.
Wow. 72 million enrolled in Medicaid.
To conclude this episode, I just want everyone to understand that the president has a lot of power. And you always want to have a person who does right by the country.
And unfortunately, we do not. Right. The other thing I would like to just end with is just a reminder: don't validate these crazy people who he's picking as his cabinet members just because they have an occasional useful policy. Right. These loons are loons, and let's draw the line. If you're a clown, you're not a serious person. We're not going to let you pretend to be a serious person and make yourself feel better. We should call out all these people if they cross a certain threshold, which I think a lot of them do, and just be aware that even if they pretend that they have some reasonable policies, that's certainly overwhelmed by the damage they can do.
Yeah. And on the other side, though, you do have to remember that, hey, the Democrats lost an election. You're going to get Republican appointees.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't help to just say, oh, everyone's unqualified. If you do that, people are just going to tune out. And for the loons that we talked about, the big four, which is now big three, they're going to get a pass. And you don't want that to happen. So
that's true.
So, it's a balancing game, right? And I'm not saying that we all have to agree on who the loons are. Someone could just say that Dr. Oz is a loon. I'm of the opinion that, yeah, he's not particularly qualified, but I think he's not someone who's at the Matthew Gates level. So just choose your battles is what I'm
I think there's room in the clown car for all of them is what I will say, or at least most of them.
Anyways, thanks for listening. Remember to like, subscribe, all that, and we'll see you next week after Thanksgiving.
See you next week. Bye-bye.